Welcome back, everybody. We've got somebody really special today, an investigative journalist who is been doing some really interesting work exposing, malfeasance of sorts. Andrew Perez of The Lever. How's that? Without further ado, let's see. I'll just get into the questions and ask him what he's been working on down there. He had an article about a rich guy named Barry Side. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
And he is one of the many people, these rich people that influence politics with his money. But who is he and what's he doing with his money?
Yeah. So Barry Side is a little known businessman from Chicago who's run this company called Triplite. It's like an electronics and surge protector company. He recently actually just donated his company to this nonprofit run by Leonard Leo, who is sort of the chief architect of the Supreme Court's conservative supermajority. And so Side put his entire company into a nonprofit run by Leo, which then sold it for $1.6 billion. So he, in effect, turned his, sort of lifelong business empire into what we believe is the biggest political advocacy donation in U.S. history.
And so what are some of the things that he's interested in investing into with that money? And did he actually inherit this company from a friend or something? Somebody passed away and he got it. How'd that work?
Yeah, so he, I guess many years ago now, like decades ago, he sort of became the assistant to the guy running Triplite, which was then called Trip Manufacturing Company. So he was sort of his assistant, and he eventually became its full owner, which I think kind of happened over years. But so he was the 100% owner of this group, and it's our understanding that Side is, basically believes that, modern kind of climate science is all fake. And he's been donating, he's obviously a conservative, ideologue in that he's been donating for many years to groups like the Heartland Institute, which are, basically, push climate denial. And then, he also helped fund Leonard Leo's project to rename the George Mason Law School, the George Mason University Law School after the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. Where they kind of differ is we believe that it's our understanding that he views himself as a libertarian, but he's putting his fortune in the hands of Leonard Leo, who is a social conservative ideologue whose sort of chief project has been remaking the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade, to invalidate federal protections for abortion rights. Where I think they kind of have some synergy is that they both believe that government regulation generally is not good.
Yeah. And so this is some of the libertarian message that's being pushed right now. People seem to have this misconception that getting rid of government it would be a great plan in that sense. But the people that are pushing this message want to keep things like the police, and also all they really want to do is get rid of regulation so that we live in a dystopia that's controlled by corporate powers instead of have any government. So libertarians really need to check themselves about that romantic view of libertarianism and what they're going for. It's two different things. So you mentioned the Heartland Institute, which is pretty insane group of people. What are some institutions like that in nature, and kind of what else do they get into political wise?
Yeah. Well, so they've long been like a climate denial hotbed. That's sort of their chief project. Years ago, they were also, basically casting doubt on the science around tobacco, and the risks of tobacco. It's some pretty charming stuff. The other thing about well, I guess, okay, there are some similar groups. One is like the CO2 Coalition. That's, another sort of climate denial group. But, you look at like the kind of conservative sphere, like a lot of this is happening at the news level too. You look at like organizations like Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, like also, climate denial. And, if you ever take a look at their website, they like happily disclose that, they were created with, almost $5 million in seed money from the Wilkes brothers, who are known for, having this fracking empire based out of Texas. So, that's what we're usually seeing here is that, oil and gas interests or, executives at these companies or people who just believe that, climate science is fake. Those are the people who are channeling a lot of money to other people to say it for them.
It's insane. And it should be said that in every industry right now, we're seeing the exact same thing, where there used to be that there was regulations of what you could say in the newspaper and what you could say on TV. But now these corporate interests can actually start websites and start blogs and become independent news sources while systematically throwing shade on whatever they need to throw shade on. I told this Canadian activist, Sephora Berman, she's awesome. She came on the show and we talked about Steve Donziger, who was, I don't know if you know this, Steve. And if you Google Steve's name, there's a smear campaign run by Chevron in an ad. It's a sponsored search results.
God.
Disturbing shit.
Wow.
Disturbing shit.
They already succeeded, right? Like they already like put that dude in jail. Like what's left to do, right? Like they put him in jail and then they put him under like house arrest for a very long time. The power structure and the power hierarchies insist upon absolutely destroying somebody until they're neutralized. So I guess that's the plan. But normal people think, God damn, that's cold blooded. Leave him alone. Like you won. Mm-hmm. You won. You did it. Yeah.
But so we're seeing a dangerous trend in the consolidation of news, obviously, and media. This started from deregulation of the media years ago. Now we got people like Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and you did a piece about this. So which billionaires own what, and what are some issues about monopolies? Maybe people don't understand the conflict of interest. What would you say?
Yeah. Well, so with Bezos, owning the Washington Post, the way that you kind of see this conflict of interest play out is at the opinion section level. Like, you see their columnists making these arguments that are like incredibly self-serving for Bezos, like about how that it's wrong for Democrats to point blame at corporate America for this rampant profiteering that's contributing to inflation. They created this whole name for it, like this derisive term, like greedflation, like ha ha, as if like it's literally not happening. Like it like doesn't exist at their paper, like at the opinion section level, that the idea that like corporate profiteering is driving inflation, despite like rampant evidence that it is, that it's potentially like the primary driver of price hikes that we're seeing right now is just greed. Like, we've literally seen like kind of all the other factors deteriorate, and that's the one that remains. And, every few months we have a new story about like, oh, corporate profits are at their highest level ever. But like, that doesn't exist at the opinion level at the Washington Post. If you look at like other news outlets that are billionaire owned, you could say like Lorraine Powell Jobs is, I think now the majority stakeholder at the Atlantic. She's, the widow of Steve Jobs from Apple. Carlos Slim for like many years has had a stake in the New York Times. But, I think, outside of the billionaire ownership, like just corporate ownership of media in general is just as or problematic, or maybe even more so. You look at like a company like NBC and MSNBC, like, which are owned by Comcast, like, it's pretty interesting how, there's all these arguments that get made on these stations in election season talking about how like progressive policies, like, the idea of like universal health care or like actually responding to climate change would really alienate voters. it's such a convenient argument to like corporate ownership, but it's one that like we hear nonstop, and it's really baked into news coverage in a way that it's hard to quantify the impact, because it's literally like just hammering people with this thought and making them think that way too, making, turning your average like TV watching lib into someone who thinks like a Democratic pundit, right? Like where they think like, well, like what would offend middle America? Like they know or care or have any context there.
Yeah. And we're seeing both of these on both sides of the spectrum. They're delivering outrage manufacturing outrage for us to pick up on. And it's working. And it's the latest.
Yeah.
We saw it. Look, in the beginning of the 20th century, we had newspapers that were this newfangled mode of communication. They were so exhilarating and new that when lies got printed, people just absorbed it like clockwork. And the internet is the next iteration of exciting new propaganda that people go, this must be true.
Yeah. Well, I guess I should definitely flag that like Fox News is owned by like Rupert Murdoch, and so is the Wall Street Journal, who is, obviously incredibly wealthy, must be a billionaire. And they have made an absolute fortune by pushing, by creating and pushing conservative propaganda in a way that has probably deeply affected our country.
Yeah. I want to say that in 1996 they deregulated the media, and they also made these protections that said, hey, you have to have dual time for each political candidate. That went out the window, and that gave birth to what we know now as pundit news, and basically a propaganda machine. So, and that's it. And these billionaires continue to consolidate the media to a point where the opinion page now is the corporate page, and it's bleeding over into the actual news. So people need to go back and read about Randolph Hearst and what's happening in that time, where the news was also a weapon that got used against the people and stuff. But, it's a deep rabbit hole. And, speaking of billionaires, and they're not paying their fair share of taxes for sure. You did a piece about this. Why is this, and who's responsible for giving these guys tax breaks constantly, when obviously they should be paying for the common public good?
Sure. There's like many kind of different ways that the tax code is written to preference and benefit the ultra wealthy. You see it like, there are preferential tax treatment of investment income, which is, primarily, or at least best benefits private equity managers, who have become like just billionaires kind of over the last like few decades. They've become just phenomenally wealthy and powerful, and, mega donors in politics. Every time Congress kind of talks about adjusting or tweaking or deleting the carried interest loophole, that benefits these private equity managers, it just never happens. Like there's always someone standing in the way. This year it was Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona, who has, really relished in the Democratic Party spoiler role. I guess other ways, you look at it. Okay, so ProPublica, we worked with them on this reporting about Barry Side. Our team at The Lever worked with them. They've been publishing for the last several months, like secret tax files of the ultra wealthy. They were basically like gifted some like confidential trove of IRS tax data. And what it shows is that billionaires often do not pay taxes, or at least they'll pay a very low tax rate. And, there's probably a bunch of reasons for that. Like Peter Thiel has shielded his entire fortune in like a Roth IRA. Which, like he literally probably taps into it a tiny bit at a time. One day it's going to eventually just be tax free, like probably not that long in the distant future. We actually got to look at, we got to work with them on this Barry Side project. So that's how we actually know that they had Barry Side's tax data. Barry Side, we know that between 1996 and 2018, he took in like $1.7 billion in income, mostly from that company, Tripp Lite, the electronics and surge protector company. And And we also know then that he donated $775 million during that time. And that's at least, he claimed that much in charitable deductions. So he might have been giving even more. And that is a distinct possibility, given that he seems to be a kind of unusually generous donor in a sort of sick way. But anyway, so, that's another way that the ultra wealthy, manage to avoid paying taxes, is they can give a lot of money to charity. And we'll use that term incredibly loosely. It's a way that they get to both avoid taxes while also seeding groups that have and espouse their own kind of ideological agenda. So that's another way that billionaires can limit their tax bill while influencing policy.
Yeah. So let's say that they work in like a community setting where you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and people need to be paying closer attention to this stuff. Not just the libs, but also all you other psychopaths. I'm an anti-humanity at this point. I just say, well, I'll let them all fight it out. I'll be up in the mountains somewhere, hopefully.
Yeah.
So I want to say The Lever is a great independent investigative news outlet that you and a friend started. How did you get your start in journalism?
So I went to journalism school kind of around the time that everyone's chief advice was to not go into journalism because it's a dying industry and it's not stable, and there's mass layoffs all the time. So I thought I was going to maybe go into politics or whatever, but I managed to get a job at the Huffington Post, an internship there. And that's sort of when I, realized that I could kind of use my research skills that I'd kind of developed over the years to cover money in politics professionally. And so then after that, I got a job with David Sirota at the International Business Times, which is part of Newsweek. And so I since then I've kind of worked off and on with David, and then I helped, I was sort of his first hire at The Lever, its first iteration. But so right after the Bernie campaign, he decided he wanted to start, writing, and I basically became his editor, and started writing some stuff of my own. And we've managed to, take that company and build we now have an 11-person team at The Lever, covering, pretty much full-time money and influence and, in industry, and looking to challenge corporate power.
Yeah. And this is what this podcast is all about, is challenging authority at every turn is possible, because fuck it, why not? And everybody out there, that mainstream media is dying or corrupted by corporations. Go and check out The Lever. They got awesome, in-depth stuff, corruption, money, and politics, like you said. Important stuff. We got to be watching these people. So my last little query is... things are becoming increasingly unstable, unhinged, out of control. What's something you do to stay calm? And how do you stay positive in a burning, sinking ship?
Yeah, well, I guess, I think that we need to be there. People need to be there kind of covering corruption, and covering, especially in this dark money era in politics, where billionaires can secretly buy elections and Supreme Court seats and what have you. So I feel it's really we have an obligation to be on it, and it's it also happens to make me feel sane. I feel it's a good way to kind of get the rage out. Is finding a story that just really massively pisses me off. That's the kind of way that I keep calm, I think, outside of pot. It's sort of 50-50. I need something that to channel my anger and put it in a way that I find productive. Yeah.
I think I'm right there with you, brother. I think it's only pot and getting angry. And that's my thing. Yeah. And this podcast, if it wasn't for this podcast, I need to interview people. I need to talk to, because I can't just angrily text everything I need to say, I need more. So, well, we want to thank Andrew Perez for coming by. In a few months, he's going to come back and he's going to give us all these updates about how these egregious, just horrible mutant people are getting away with this.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you.
All right. Bye. Bye.